is there a truly reality out there that humans could really know? It's an age-old battle between realists and absolutists. God is not great, how religion ruins everything. And yet it's utterly and totally ridiculous. We need to live for something beyond ourselves. I grew up reading the novels of Fyodor Dostoevsky and loved them. But it really wasn't until my 40s that I discovered Leo Tolstoy, War and Peace, Anna Karenina, and others. And I just immediately fell in love with his writings. And I read many of his short stories too. And it's interesting because Tolstoy had reached an existential crisis in his middle age. He asked the questions, what was the purpose of his life? What was the meaning of life in general? How can life have any meaning when death comes along and takes it all away? These were the themes he was struggling with in some of his writings. And that's a little bit what I want to look at now, because he asked some very interesting questions and he came to some very interesting conclusions as well. And it'd be fun to take a look at what he concluded as he dealt with this difficult subject. You know, you read a number of his writings, Tolstoy's writings, particularly his short story, The Death of Ivan Ilyich, when you can see his real concern. It's of this man, he has a life and then he just gets sick and he dies, and what is the meaning of life when he dies? And that was just one aspect of where Tolstoy dealt with this theme. He wrote, in his middle age, he wrote a very powerful little essay called The Confession, which was sort of documented his whole spiritual and somewhat intellectual journey, and it's a fascinating read. Now, in it, Tolstoy, he talked about his early years, how he lost his Christian faith. Just as he got a little older, he just threw it all out. And like many in his time, Tolstoy believed in the idea of progress. This was an Enlightenment ideal. It's the idea that humans, once they break off the shackles of religion and superstition, humanity can perfect itself. Humanity can progress. Humanity was sort of on an upward path towards utopia. And this was sort of the ideal that spurred him on. And he believed this for a number of years. But then he tells us in the Confessions one of the things that happened to him. He says, so for instance, during my stay in Paris, the sight of an execution revealed to me the instability of my superstitious belief in progress. When I saw the head part from the body and how they thumped separately into the box, I understood, not with my mind, but with my whole being, that no theory of reasonableness of our present progress could justify this deed. In other words, seeing a couple of heads chopped off in Paris sort of got him against the idea so much that humans are progressing. He then says that he moved from one thing to the other to try to find answers. Philosophy, science, art, human knowledge in and of itself. And in the end, like Goethe's Faust, none of these things he felt could answer the questions about the meaning of life. Not a life that always, in every single case, ended in death. The thing, too, about Tolstoy is that from a human perspective, the man had everything you could want in this world. I mean, he says himself here, let me read you from Confessions. He said, and all this befell me at a time when all around me I had what is considered good fortune. I was not yet 50. I had a good wife who loved me and whom I loved, good children, a large estate without much effort on my part improved and increased. I was respected by my relations and acquaintances more than at any previous time. I was praised by others, and without much self-deception, I could consider my name was famous, and far from being insane, I enjoyed a strength of mind and body seldom as I have met with men of any kind. Physically, I could keep up with the peasants at mowing, and mentally I could work for 8-10 hours at a stretch without experiencing any ill results from such exertion. And in this situation, I came to this, that I could not live, and fearing death, had to employ cunning with myself to avoid taking my own life. See, Tolstoy, he had everything, and yet he was so depressed about his lack of answer to what he thought was important. And that was, what is the meaning of life? Because he ultimately concluded that life had no meanings. He said, the truth is that life is meaningless. And then he said, here's from what else he said, the following: today or tomorrow sickness and death will come. They had already. To those whom I love or who love me, nothing will remain but stench and worms. Sooner or later my affairs, whatever they may be, will be forgotten, and I shall not exist. How can man feel to see this? Why go on making any effort? And how to go on living? One can only live while one is intoxicated with life. As soon as one is sober, it is impossible not to see that it is all a mere fraud, and a stupid fraud. This is precisely what it is. There is nothing either amusing or witty about it. It is simply cruel and stupid. He's talking about his life now. He said too, I sought in all branches of knowledge, but far from finding what I wanted, became convinced that all those who, like myself, had thought and knowledge for the meaning of life had found nothing. But they had plainly acknowledged that the very thing which could cause me to despair, namely the senselessness of life, is the one indubitable thing that man can know. Then he says, what will come of what I do today or tomorrow? What will come of my entire life? Expressed another way, the question can be put like this: why do I live? Why do I wish for anything? Or expressed another way, is there any meaning in my life that will not be annihilated by the inevitability of death that awaits me? Again, I can't disagree with him. Death takes everything away. But what I thought was the most interesting was this one thing that he said in here, which I thought was fabulous. He said, it followed that rational knowledge does not provide the meaning of life, but excuse it. He says, rational knowledge led me to recognize that life is meaningless. My life came to a halt and I wanted to kill myself. And in the end, he said, he sought for irrational knowledge. He said he had to do that in order to find the meaning of life. Now, I don't like the phrase irrational knowledge, because irrational has certain connotations. But I think if I were writing this, I would say what you need is trans-rational knowledge. You need knowledge that goes beyond the rational. See, Tolstoy's point is very simple. The world in and of itself didn't answer the most basic questions about the meaning of life. In a sense, that's because the world isn't the answer. In a sense, the world is the problem, because it's a world that eventually death swallows up everything. It's a world that's ultimately destroyed. So what does it mean? Funny, a famous physicist named Steven Weinberg once said, the most extreme hope for science is that it will be able to trace the explanation of all natural phenomena to final law and accidents, which means we're all accidents. See, Tolstoy saw that. He saw that belief, and it terrified him, because he realized it ultimately made life was going to be meaningless. That's why in the end he had to step beyond just pure rational thinking, beyond that, because he saw where it would lead. And he had to reach out in faith. And if you think about it, folks, in the end, where else are you going to put your hope? In something smaller than you, less than you, when you yourself can't even explain yourself or what even keeps you alive? Tolstoy, I think, was onto something. He saw that in order to find meaning to life, he had to move beyond life itself. He had to move beyond the world itself. He had to move into something greater than the world, something not only eternal, but which somehow allows us to partake of eternity as well. Otherwise, everything will get swept away. And we have nothing waits us but what another Russian writer, Vladimir Nabokov, once called the two eternities of darkness that are on either side of us. Because in the end, if this is a godless universe and nothing transcends the world, and all we are matter in the void, and all we are is what the scientists tell us, then inevitably we and everything we have done, anybody who's ever known us, any thoughts, anything we've ever had, any consciousness at all, sooner or later, it's all going to be wiped out forever. And somehow I just don't think that makes total sense. I think there's more to us than that.